The story of Jean Thurnherr is the story of a pretty young girl who was a very devious and delusional con artist. The information I found since I recorded Peculiar Jean Part 1 convinced me that I was sucked into her drama, as were most people at that time. Jean became a media sensation in 1903, not as Jean Thurnherr, but as Bessie Barclay, and several other names she had adopted. She lied as she breathed. Her stories changed to fit her audience. See if you can figure out which stories are true and which were from a very fertile imagination. Welcome, everyone, to the conclusion of Jean Thurnherr. In our last video, Jean was diagnosed with a dual personality, and then the media sensation, who was in newspaper articles around the country and in and out of jail for years, disappeared from the public eye. While searching for news of Jean Thurnherr, I realized that even during the time she was a media sensation, she went by different names. Of course, during some of her adventures, she posed as a boy, and I finally found out the name she went by. That will come later. She was a very pretty and charming con artist. Jean M. Gordon, not Bessie Barclay, married Albert Thurnherr in 1908 in Alameda, California. He was 26 and she was 20. At times, she lied about her age to, I believe, appear to be younger and more innocent. I gleaned the following wild stories of her adventures. During her latest escapade, she has run an elevator, sold papers, and driven a grading team for a living. She was quoted in the article, "I don't care to go back home, for I can make my own way in the world, without the assistance of my parents." Her blue eyes sparkled as she talked about her achievements in the city jail. At that time, she was wearing a suit of boys' clothes with a neat shirt, tie, and a jaunty cap. She acted the part of a handsome boy of about 14. 3 months earlier, she had secured a position as a cabin boy on a schooner bound for Puget Sound ports. No one suspected she was a girl until a gust of wind blew off her cap and exposed her wealth of hair. The schooner was detained long enough to send the girl ashore, and she was later returned to her parents. So for her next escapade, she cut her hair into a boyish fashion that was particularly becoming to her sweet, innocent-looking face. I found an article in 1903 that was about Bessie Barclay. When she was a cabin boy, she had disappeared for the second time from her home for a whole week. She was quoted saying, "I have earned my living honestly since leaving home, and I kept myself straight. But I learned many things about boys, being associated with them as I have. And I must say that I do not think much of their morals as a general rule." In 1909, an article was about Bessie Barclay. She was well known in Oakland, California in 1904. She was not heard of in the area until 1909, when she had confessed to forgery and 3 burglaries. When she was arrested by police in Berkeley, she was known as Mrs. Thurnherr or Jean Gordon. When arrested in 1909, she tells the story of her escapades being a cowboy in Arizona and Mexico. Her adopted father was Judge Barclay. They lived on a ranch, and Bessie, our Jean, had a pony named Blanco, and she took the pony and set out for Mexico. She said she acquired a sombrero and boys' clothes and was soon crossing the border at Tijuana. She had many adventures after that. She continued south and crossed the Gulf of California at Guaymas. She met a customs officer who asked her to take some horses to the interior. He told her she could have one if she accepted the mission, and she jumped at the chance to get a horse for herself. I guess she lost Blanco somewhere. She rode to the city of Mexico and fell in with nice people and was treated well. After a while, she rode north on the range. She herded cattle about the border of Arizona and Mexico. She fell in with a person named Cowboy Pete, and she said they camped out and she enjoyed her freedom. In the fall of the year, she rode her horse back to San Diego. And now we're going to talk about the alias, Ava Munson. She was adopted as a baby by Judge Barkley. In August 1904, Bessie, we're back to Bessie Barkley, was arrested for stealing boys' underwear and several suits of clothes from her employer, a dry goods merchant. Bessie, our Jean, wanted to go to work on a farm, and she needed some clothes. In San Jose, where she was arrested, she told the story of her escapade to Mexico, but she stated that she and another girl ran away dressed like boys. In this version, she and her friend crossed to Guaymas and then Mazatlan. She said she had ridden thoroughbreds at Santa Monica and she loved horses, so she asked to break horses in Tijuana. She broke 2 horses for $10. That money carried her and her friend quite far. They worked to Mexico City and then took a train to San Diego. Her adopted mother, she said, sent her girls clothes, and then she went home. She spoke well of her adopted parents, and her case in San Diego was on hold, pending communication with Judge Barkley. We have Bessie Barkley on all of her wild adventures. 8 months after her marriage to Albert Thurnherr, she was arrested for forgery and burglary. She claims to have been a victim of hypnosis. The chief of police, in June 1909, learned that Jean had confided to a woman that she had had a love affair with a famous burglar and safecracker. She said it was love at first sight, and before intimacy had occurred, her lover was arrested and sent to the penitentiary. He was to serve 4 years. Jean's love grew even more for the criminal. She vowed to wait for him, but she decided instead to marry Albert Thurnherr, and the romance with the safecracker was ended. So now Jean tells the police that she can't forget him. It was he who first got her to think of being a burglar. And when she thinks of him and his way of living, she is led to steal. Accused of stealing, she was held over for trial. Poor Albert Thurnherr stood by her side. It was also brought out in the hearing that in 1904, Jean, as Bessie Barkley, was arrested in San Francisco for picking the pocket of a person on a ferry. In 1904, they say, when she was 17, and that when she was in Guaymas and took the horses for the customs agent, she was not given the horse, she stole it. She got on the steamer as a cabin boy when she learned the police were after her. Now, people, for the big surprise. I found out that when Bessie Barkley was adopted, her birth name was Ava Munson, so I decided to check out Ava. You can imagine how surprised I was to find a lot of information on Ava Munzie or Evelyn Munson. Ava was a character. Little Ava Munson, or Evelyn, indulged too freely in her love for adventure when she took $340 in coin and gold nuggets valued at $80 from a man named Nelson, a miner. He was from Nome. Ava was held on $1,000 bond on a charge of grand larceny. Eva, or Jean, frankly acknowledged having taken the money and having been with the man in his room at the Tremont house, but she insisted that she had never done anything wrong before. She was good at playing naive, young, and innocent. She was finally dressed in clothes from Santa Cruz, which she had purchased with the stolen money. They state she is 17 years old and acted childish and puzzled at being accused. The judge was moved by her innocence, but still had to hold her for trial. He expressed that he wished she might appear before a merciful judge who might give her another chance and not send her to prison. Then the article goes on to tell about her adventures as Judge Barkley's adopted daughter. The information was taken from Eva's diary found in her trunk by the police. They read that Eva had her adventure to Mexico with her friend. They were both dressed as boys. Her name was Jessie. They posed as brothers and walked to Port Los Angeles and were employed as cabin boys. Then they found themselves in San Diego, where Eva worked as an elevator operator and Jessie worked as a messenger. Then Eva tells how she went south and broke horses in Tijuana. In Guaymas, she broke another horse for a customs officer. And in Mexico City, she broke 2 more. They rode pack mules to Mexico City and to Texas, through New Mexico to Arizona. They drove a wagon across the desert to San Diego and then home. She wrote that Jessie got married in August and Eva again left home. Here's another twist about Eva Munson. The name Eva Munson is not Jean's given name. An article about the mad pranks of Bessie Barkley, whose mania for wearing boys' clothes and having adventures drove Mrs. Barkley to an early grave. They call her Harebrained Bessie. Her adopted father, Mr. Barkley, is heartsick, and his partner, Gilbert Munson, whose name Bessie had taken, are deeply affected by their failure to make Bessie into a self-respecting woman. Mr. Munson said, Evelyn Munson, who has been arrested in Santa Cruz, is not his daughter. The girl is known as Bessie Barkley, another name she used. He corrects her name and says she is Bessie Hicks. Her whim has brought ruin to the Barkley family, and Mrs. Barkley lies in her grave in the pretty home where the erring girl was taken in and treated like a daughter is desolate. Judge Munson was not related to the girl, but now his name has been ridiculed and his wife overcome. When Eva was arrested, she told of her adoption by Munson, all a lie, and she was caught with $192.50 and the gold nuggets. Another old article from the San Francisco Examiner talks about the diary of the adventuresome Evelyn Barkley, known as Evelyn Munson and Bessie Hicks, who, with a friend, Jessie Penrod, so now we may have the real name of her adventuresome friend, Jessie Penrod, and the girls' aliases as boys were Jack and Ray Parker, and they pretended to be brothers. Now we come to the part of her operation. The details are in the video part 1, but let me just say that Jean underwent surgery to remove a small portion of her skull near the right ear. This operation was to relieve pressure on her brain. The operation was to cure her kleptomania, but the operation was unsuccessful. She continued to live her life under aliases and as a thief. During the operation, of course, she was married to Albert Thurnherr, and she was going by Jean Thurnherr at that time. But in 1913, of course, she was getting in trouble. She was getting arrested at different times. So in 1913, she told a reporter that when she ran off to be a cowboy, she left with an actress. They pretended to be boys, and the actress played the part of a boy with tuberculosis. So the people would feel sorry for them and give them food and maybe a place to stay. She continued saying that she had never been on a horse before and broke a horse simply because she got mad and saw red. She had a very difficult time keeping her stories straight. Every time she told the stories of her adventures, the details changed. I'm going to interject something here. If Jean had a dual personality or multiple personality disorder, I read that the host person would not be aware of the other personalities. She would not be able to tell the stories of the adventuresome boy or the thieving girl. The newspapers seemed to glamorize Jean's antics. As covered in Part 1, Jean married Albert Thurnherr in 1908. She continued her life of stealing. She married him as Jean M. Gordon. She was put in San Quentin for grand larceny, and Albert waited for her dutifully. Albert himself was charged with embezzling a suit of clothing. Thurnherr claims his employer gave him the property. I would think that Jean had something to do with it, but she was in prison at the time he was charged. Another article says that Albert was dismissed from his job because of notoriety of his wife's escapades. In June 1909, before Jean was sent to prison, a close watch was being kept on Jean and her husband to prevent them from carrying out a suicide pact. Jean was sent to San Quentin in September 1909. She was discharged in 1910. She continued her thieving ways under aliases. Here, she was arrested as Alice Taylor. Her lawyers had the judge consider allowing Jean to go through another operation on her skull to cure her from stealing, but nothing ever came of it. She was sent to an insane asylum, but quickly discharged for being sane. After that, the judges claimed that she had a dual personality and her case was quashed and her record cleared. Jean Thurnherr was no longer in the news after 1913. In 1924, Jean was going by the name of Jean M. Gordon, and she married Floyd L. Lattin. He was a World War I veteran and a carpenter. She remained married to Floyd until her death. I found them together in the 1930, 1940, and 1950 census records. Jean died first in June 1961. Before we get to Jean's death, an interesting point was that she had knocked 5 years off of her age. She was born in November 1889. When she met Floyd, she told him she was 30, and he told her he was 30 also. She took that secret to her grave because on her tombstone her birthday is 1894. She died in June and was buried at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. Floyd followed her in September. The couple shares the stone, which is customary for national cemeteries. I hope you enjoyed the wild and crazy story of Jean Thurnherr, or Jean Gordon, or all the other aliases. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more stories. Bye.